It was evening. The sky over New York was painted in shades of gold. As the sun began to sink behind the skyline, the air carried the cool scent of autumn. Fallen leaves scattered across the pavement like fragments of an untold story. In that silent hour, Sean stepped out of his car. The same smile that once lit up his college days was nowhere to be found. The rush of work, the chase for success, and the noise of life had quietly stolen the sparkle from his eyes. As he reached the door of his house, he paused for a moment. This was the home he once called our dream place. Every corner held a trace of love, the blue couch Sophie had chosen, the little plant she called Hope, and the familiar scent of morning coffee that once filled their world with warmth. But tonight, something felt different. The door was slightly ajar, and the lights inside were dim. Sean's steps slowed on their own. His heart whispered, maybe she's upset. But reason replied, no, she doesn't get upset anymore. She just grows silent. He walked in. Sophie was sitting by the window. As always, a book rested in her lap, but the page hadn't turned for a long time. She looked up just for a moment, and then her eyes drifted away again. Sean softly said, "Hey, I'm home." No reply. Just a quiet breath, heavy with unspoken thoughts. 2 plates sat on the dining table. One filled with food, the other empty. Sean pulled out a chair and sat down. He lifted a spoon, tasted the soup, but the flavor was missing. Like something precious had vanished from it. The silence in the room was so thick that even the ticking clock sounded loud. There was a time when laughter lived between them. Sean would share every story from his day, and Sophie would listen with a glow in her eyes, coloring his dreams with warmth. Now those dreams seemed buried under dust. Sophie's gaze remained fixed outside the window, where the moon had just begun to rise. She finally spoke, her voice soft but tired. "How was your day, Sean?" "Just the usual," he replied. "Meetings, clients, numbers." And then, silence again. A heavy, aching silence. Sean looked at her carefully. She was still the same. The straight brown hair, the soft blue sweater, the gentle face. But her eyes carried a story that had never been told. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. Sophie gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine." The sentence that hides everything not fine. Sean tried to change the subject. But somewhere deep inside, fear stirred. The kind of fear that comes when love begins to fade without a sound. When hearts separate quietly, without a fight, without a reason. Night fell deeper. Sean went to the bedroom. Sophie stayed by the window. The moonlight touched her face softly, and it seemed as if she wasn't glowing in the light. She was fading in it. Before turning away, Sean looked back once more and thought. Morning light crept through the blinds, drawing pale lines across the living room floor. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, but pressure. Sean sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice the empty chair across from him. Sophie was in the kitchen, her movements soft, careful, almost mechanical, like someone performing an old ritual with no meaning left in it. She placed a cup of coffee before him. Black, no sugar, right? He nodded. It was the same routine, the same words, yet somehow everything felt unfamiliar. The smell of coffee used to be comforting. Now it reminded him of everything they no longer said to each other. Outside, cars passed, horns echoed faintly. Life went on, but inside that house, time had stopped. Sean looked up and tried to start a conversation. "So, are you still thinking about that art class you wanted to join?" Sophie didn't look up. "I canceled it," she said softly. "Why?" She shrugged. Didn't feel like it anymore. He wanted to ask more, but the way she turned away told him not to. Her voice, her body language, everything about her said, "Please, don't dig deeper." And so he didn't. He just took another sip of coffee, pretending it didn't taste bitter. Later that day, while Sean was leaving for work, Sophie stood by the door, not close enough to hug, not far enough to ignore. She said, "Drive safe," without emotion. And he said, "I will," without looking back. As he stepped into the car, he caught his own reflection in the window. There was a stranger looking back, a man who once promised the world to the woman he loved, and now couldn't even promise her a single smile. All day, he tried to shake off the unease. He told himself it was just a phase. That work stress, fatigue, and time did this to everyone. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "No, this is something else. Something slipping away." Evening came. When he returned home, the lights were off. The same faint music played a piano piece Sophie loved years ago. He saw her sitting on the couch, staring at an old photo album. He froze at the doorway, watching her fingers trace over their wedding picture, her eyes distant, unreadable. Sean took a slow breath and said, "You're looking at old memories again." She didn't flinch. She just smiled, faintly. Sometimes it's easier to live in the past. That line cut deeper than she realized. For the first time, Sean felt what she must have been feeling all this time. That love doesn't always die with anger. Sometimes it fades away quietly, like dust gathering on something once beautiful. He wanted to walk to her, to sit beside her, to say something real. But his own fear stopped him. The fear that maybe she had already gone too far away to hear him anymore. Sophie closed the album, placed it gently on the table, and said, "Dinner's on the stove if you're hungry." Then she walked past him, her perfume lingering longer than her presence. Sean stood there, looking at the photograph, two people smiling beneath sunlight, holding hands, never knowing that one day, silence would take their place. And for the first time in years, he whispered to himself, "What happened to us?" But the only answer that came was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, steady, cruel, and indifferent. The days began to blur. Sunrises came and went, yet every morning felt the same. A dull repetition of silence wrapped in routine. Sean would leave for work. Tie knotted neatly, face calm, eyes empty. Sophie would wave from the porch, that small, polite motion that said, "I still remember what we used to be." And then the door would close, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than sound itself. At the office, Sean pretended everything was fine. He laughed when others did, answered calls, smiled at clients. But every time his phone lit up with Sophie's name, his heart hesitated because now, even her messages had stopped coming. No, have lunch. No, miss you. Just nothing. That night, he came home earlier than usual, maybe hoping to surprise her. Maybe just to feel the warmth that had somehow slipped away. But the house greeted him with the same stillness. Lights dim, music off, curtains closed. He walked toward the kitchen. On the fridge, a small note was pinned. "Dinner's in the oven. Don't wait for me." No heart, no smiley face, no trace of affection, just words. He read it again and again. Each word felt colder the more he looked at it. He sat on the couch and turned on the TV, not to watch, but to fill the silence. His eyes caught something on the table, a ring box. Not new, old, slightly worn. He opened it and found Sophie's wedding ring lying inside. His throat tightened. A memory hit him like wind against a flame. He could still see that night. The soft glow of fairy lights, the sound of the ocean. Sophie's trembling hands as he slipped that ring onto her finger and whispered, "I promise, I'll never make you cry." And she had laughed, that pure, fragile laugh that used to melt his world. He closed the box slowly, his fingers trembling. He wanted to ask her why, but he already knew the answer. Promises, when left unattended, fade like voices in an empty room. The front door creaked. Sophie walked in, her hair slightly damp from the evening air. She looked at him, surprised, maybe even uneasy. "You're home early," she said, hanging her coat. "I wanted to see you," he replied. His voice was steady, but his heart wasn't. "That's nice." She sat across from him, her hands folded. Between them lay the ring box, silent, accusing. Her eyes shifted to it. A pause, a deep breath. I thought maybe. She began, then stopped. He leaned forward. Maybe what? She shook her head. Nothing. Forget it. But he couldn't, because he saw it, that glimmer of pain in her eyes. The kind that comes when someone has already said goodbye in their heart. He wanted to fight it, to argue, to demand, to plead. But instead, he said softly, Sophie, when did we stop talking? She looked at him, startled, maybe because it was the first honest question in months. Her lips trembled before she whispered, when you stopped listening. And with that, she stood up and walked away, leaving Sean sitting there, the echo of her words bouncing in the hollow corners of their home. He stayed still for a long time. The TV flickered, the clock ticked, and somewhere in that quiet night, he realized that love doesn't end with a fight. It ends when silence becomes easier than conversation. Outside, the city lights shimmered, but inside, Sean sat in the dim glow, holding the ring box like a memory he didn't know how to let go of. The morning sun crept through the blinds, soft and golden, painting the room with a light that felt almost ironic, too gentle for the heaviness that filled the air. Sophie was already awake. Sean could hear the faint sound of drawers opening, fabric rustling, zippers sliding. He sat up slowly, watching the pale outline of her moving across the room. There was something different in her rhythm today, a strange calmness, like someone walking through the final scene of a story they already know the ending of. She was folding clothes neatly, quietly placing them into a small suitcase that sat open on the bed. It wasn't packed with everything, just enough. For a moment, he thought it was nothing, maybe a trip. Maybe she was visiting her sister again. But his heart knew better. The way she avoided looking at him, the way her hands trembled just slightly when she picked up her favorite scarf. It wasn't a trip. It was a departure. He stood by the door, silent. Sophie didn't turn. The only sound between them was the soft creak of the suitcase zipper. Finally, he spoke, his voice fragile. Going somewhere? She paused, her hand resting on the handle. Just taking a few days. He tried to smile, but it hurt. Few days. She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. I think we both need space. Space? The word echoed in his chest, like an explosion wrapped in velvet. Space, something that used to mean freedom, but now sounded like distance. Like the dark gap between two hearts that once beat together. He walked closer, his steps hesitant. You don't have to go, he whispered. Sophie turned slowly, finally looking at him, her eyes soft, glistening. Full of years, she had swallowed quietly. I already left a long time ago, Sean, she said. I'm just catching up to it now. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. It was strange. The words weren't cruel. They were heartbreakingly gentle. The kind that doesn't wound with noise, but kills with truth. He reached out, wanting to touch her hand. But she stepped back, not in rejection, but in sorrow. I don't blame you, she said softly. We both stopped trying. We just drifted apart, one quiet day after another. Her eyes darted toward the ring box still lying on the coffee table. A shadow crossed her face, a mix of regret, exhaustion, and peace. Sean sat down on the edge of the bed, his fingers running through his hair. All the moments flashed before him. Their first date, their small apartment, the rain that night he proposed. The laughter, the fights, the silences that grew longer and longer. He wanted to say don't go. He wanted to promise change, to beg, to plead, to hold. But something deep inside told him, this wasn't a moment for begging. It was a moment for understanding. He looked up at her and said quietly, will you come back? Sophie smiled a soft, broken smile. Maybe, if we ever remember how to talk again. Then she zipped the suitcase, lifted it, and walked toward the door. For a second, she stopped her hand on the knob, as if waiting for him to say something that could stop time. But he didn't. He couldn't, And just like that, she opened the door and stepped into the morning light. Sean sat there, watching the sun spill across the empty room. The silence was deafening. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was the sound of love dying peacefully. The next morning, Oliver woke up before dawn. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Sunlight had not yet touched the curtains, and everything felt suspended, as if the world had stopped waiting for him to act. He got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Claire, and went downstairs. His mind was restless. The memory of the phone call still echoed in his head. And the man's words, "She's hiding something from you." Oliver wouldn't fade. He didn't want to believe it. But doubt had already planted its poisonous roots in his heart. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring at the steam curling into the air. The house felt different now, like it held secrets in its walls. His eyes drifted toward the small study near the back of the living room. That room was Claire's sanctuary, her art space, her escape. She had always kept it locked, but lately, she'd been extra protective about it. For a few moments, Oliver hesitated. Then, driven by a quiet storm of curiosity and fear, he went upstairs and took the key from Claire's purse. His hands trembled as he unlocked the door. Inside, the room smelled faintly of paint and lavender. Her sketches were scattered across the desk, drawings of faces, streets, and sometimes him. But one sketch caught his attention, a man's portrait he had never seen before. The face looked familiar in an uncomfortable way. He reached for it, and beneath the sketch was an envelope. It was addressed to Eleanor, for when the time comes. Eleanor, he frowned. Who was Eleanor? He sat down and unfolded the letter with hesitant fingers. Greater than, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I can no longer hide what I've done. The past has a cruel way of returning, no matter how far we run. I thought by starting over, by changing my name, I could escape it. But the truth never stays buried forever." Oliver froze. The handwriting was unmistakably Claire's. His breath quickened as he read further, each line revealing more shadows than light, greater than, "You must understand, I never meant to hurt anyone. I loved him. But I couldn't save him. The fire wasn't an accident. It was supposed to end the pain, not begin it again. If they ever find me, promise me you'll protect the truth." The letter slipped from Oliver's shaking hands. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His wife, the woman he thought he knew, was living under a false name. And there had been a fire. Just then, he heard a soft sound behind him, the creak of a floorboard. He turned sharply. Claire was standing at the door, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "Oliver," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You weren't supposed to see that." Silence filled the room, heavy and dangerous. Oliver's lips parted, but no words came. The truth was no longer a mystery. It was standing right in front of him, wearing the face of the woman he loved. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was so heavy it almost pressed the air out of the room. Claire's hands were trembling, her eyes darting from the letter on the table to Oliver's frozen expression. He looked as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. "Claire," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Who is Eleanor? And what fire are you talking about?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength from the quiet. Then she took a step forward, her voice breaking. "Eleanor was my real name. Claire is the person I became after everything went wrong." Oliver blinked, unable to process the words. "You changed your name?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I had to. There was no other way to survive." He stared at her, disbelief painted across his face. "Survive from what, Claire? What are you talking about?" Claire walked to the window, her fingers tracing the cold glass as memories returned to her like sharp pieces of glass. "5 years ago," she began softly, "I lived in Chicago. I was married to a man named David. He was kind at first, gentle even. But over time, he changed. He became possessive, violent. I tried to leave, but he wouldn't let me. That night, the night of the fire, I just wanted to escape. Her voice cracked as tears gathered in her eyes. He locked me inside the house after another fight. I don't even remember lighting the candle. It all happened so fast. When the flames spread, I thought it was the end. I barely escaped. But David, he didn't. Oliver stood motionless. Every word she said felt like a hammer striking his chest. You mean, he died? She nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. The police believed it was an accident, but I couldn't bear the guilt. I thought if I stayed, they would find out the truth, that I had caused it. So, I disappeared. Changed my name. Moved here, and then, I met you. Her voice softened, trembling between guilt and love. You gave me peace, Oliver. You made me believe I could start again. But the past never really goes away. Someone must have found out. That's why the call came. Oliver ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts in chaos. The woman standing before him was both familiar and a stranger. He could still see the same kindness in her eyes, but now, those eyes hid a tragedy he had never known. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his tone caught between anger and heartbreak. Because, she said quietly, I was afraid you'd stop loving me if you knew who I really was. Oliver turned away, pacing the room, his mind racing through the pieces of her story, the lies, the fear, the pain. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but deep inside, another emotion was fighting to surface: compassion. The woman before him wasn't a monster. She was broken, haunted, and human. He took a deep breath and looked at her again. Claire, or Eleanor, whatever your name is. You should have trusted me. We could have faced this together. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, It's too late for that now. They know where I am. Oliver's eyes widened. What do you mean? She turned slowly toward him, her expression filled with dread. Last night wasn't just a phone call. It was a warning. They're coming for me, Oliver. The ticking clock in the hallway suddenly sounded louder, like a countdown. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows as darkness wrapped around the house like a warning. Oliver stood frozen, the echo of Claire's words still ringing in his mind. They're coming for me. Claire, he said, his voice sharp with tension. Who exactly is coming for you? She hesitated, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. Her voice trembled. There's a man. David's brother Marcus. He never believed the fire was an accident. He swore he'd find me and make me pay for what happened. Oliver's heartbeat quickened. And you think he found you now? Claire nodded slowly, her hands tightening into fists. The phone call. It wasn't random. He said my real name, Oliver, Eleanor, he said. You thought you could bury the flames. But ashes still remember the fire. A chill ran through Oliver's spine. Every word carried a sense of doom that clung to the air. He took a step closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. We'll go to the police. We'll tell them everything. The truth about you. The fire, Marcus, everything. But she shook her head violently. No. If I go to them, they'll open the case again. They'll think I'm guilty. I can't go through that, Oliver. I can't. He exhaled heavily, torn between logic and love. Then what do you suggest? Just wait for him to come here. She looked down, silent for a moment. Then her voice came out low, almost whispering. I've been running my whole life. Maybe it's time to stop. The words hung in the air, final, heavy, frightening. Oliver felt his chest tighten. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Years of fear had carved deep shadows beneath them. He reached for her hand, his voice softening. You're not alone anymore, Claire. I don't care who you were, you're my wife now, and I won't let anyone hurt you. Tears welled in her eyes. For a brief moment, she looked at him with the same tenderness she once did when everything between Them was still simple. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Before Oliver could respond, a sudden thud echoed from the front porch. They both froze. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Did you hear that? Oliver nodded silently, moving toward the living room. He reached for the small flashlight on the shelf, his steps cautious. The air felt thicker now, like the house itself was holding its breath. Another sound followed, the metallic click of the front gate being pushed open. Oliver's pulse raced. He turned off the lights, motioning for Claire to stay quiet. The two of them crouched near the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. In the dim glow of the street, a figure stood outside the gate, tall, still, wearing a long dark coat. The man's face was shadowed, but his stance carried a familiarity that chilled Claire to her core. Marcus, she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Oliver's hand tightened around hers. He found you. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate. The crunch of gravel under his boots echoing through the silence. Then he stopped right at their door and slid something under it. A folded note. Oliver waited until the footsteps faded away before reaching for it. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper. Written in bold black ink were just 3 words. The truth burns. Claire gasped, stepping back, her face pale. Oliver looked at her, realization dawning in his eyes. This isn't over, he said grimly. It's only beginning. The note trembled in Oliver's hands. He looked at Claire or Eleanor, as the past still whispered, and saw the fragile mixture of fear and resolve in her eyes. This ends tonight, he said softly, though his voice carried steel beneath the tenderness. Claire nodded, her fingers clutching his. The house was dark now, the shadows dancing along the walls as if mirroring the storm in their hearts. Outside, the city continued its indifferent hum, oblivious to the terror and love contained within these walls. They spent the next hour preparing. Claire gathered only what was essential: her passport, her old sketches, the few items that defined her true identity. Oliver checked the locks, stacked chairs against the door, and positioned the flashlight where they could see any movement outside. Neither spoke much. Words felt trivial in the weight of what awaited them. And then the knock came, slow, methodical, persistent. Oliver's pulse accelerated. Claire's breath hitched. But they did not run. They did not cry. They waited, silent, as the figure appeared in the dim light of the porch. Marcus. The man's eyes gleamed with a mixture of obsession and vengeance. He stepped closer, ignoring the barricade, as if the house itself did not exist. Eleanor, he called, his voice low and menacing. You cannot hide from the past. You belong to it. Claire stepped forward, her back straight, though every muscle in her body trembled. I belong to myself now, she said, her voice trembling but firm. And he belongs to me. Oliver placed his hand on hers. We face this together, he said. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The night held its breath. Then Marcus lunged. Sean, no, Oliver reacted instinctively. He blocked the door, shouting at Marcus to stop. The struggle was brief, but fierce. In the chaos, Claire slipped past, her suitcase in hand. She ran down the street, disappearing into the shadows, carrying not fear, but the fierce determination of survival. Marcus froze for a second, confused, and then the police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called, or perhaps fate had finally intervened. Marcus turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the house silent once again. Oliver sank to the floor, his chest heaving. He stared at the door, at the empty street beyond. He could feel her presence lingering, though she was gone. He could feel the love, the guilt, the pain, and the relief, all tangled together like a flame that would not die. Hours later, when the city had settled into the quiet of early morning, Oliver found a note slipped under the door. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. Oliver, I am free now, and so are we. Do not search for me. Do not look back. Remember me as someone who loved you, truly, and fought to live, Eleanor. He read the words again and again, the weight of them pressing on his heart. She had left, but she had not left him entirely. She had given herself back, and in doing so, had given him the memory of love that survived even in silence. Oliver sat in the dim light, staring at the sunrise creeping through the windows. He thought of all the promises unspoken, the tears shed quietly, the laughter that once filled the rooms, and he realized love does not always end with confrontation, nor with shouting. Sometimes it ends quietly, in the courage to let go, and the grace to remember. The house was empty, yet full. Empty of her body, but full of everything she had left behind, lessons, memories, and a flame that would never fully die. He whispered to the silent walls, "Goodbye, Eleanor. Be free." And somewhere, in the soft distance, the world continued, but inside Oliver, and inside the memory of Claire Eleanor, the fire burned gently, forever a final flame that neither time nor sorrow could extinguish.